There are two types of window collisions in general. The first is kind of territorial aggression, which is just wrapping up for us here. This is when a bird will kind of challenge its reflection in the window, and it can be a lot of pecking and fluttering and flapping, but it's not high speed. It generally doesn't hurt the bird, although it's kind of annoying if you're sitting there and it keeps doing that. That can happen like in car rear view mirrors too. If there's some photo lovers out there, there's some cool pictures of that. We are not talking about that. We are talking about the high-speed collisions that either kill or injure the bird. Sometimes the bird is okay, but often they're not. So that is what this whole talk is going to focus about. We're also not talking about perching and nesting. So you'll get a lot of people, well, maybe not you, but we get a lot of people saying, oh, well, we talked to a bird consultant for our new building. Usually what they mean is to keep seagulls from pooping on the cars in the parking lot and from birds nesting. And those folks in general don't know anything about window collisions. So if someone is building a building and you're talking to them about making it bird friendly, and they say they got a consultant, make sure you ask another question or two about what exactly the consultant did. When we talk about what is a bird friendly building, we often kind of get people thinking that we mean like a warehouse or a concrete bunker, like you see a warehouse on the right here. And that is not the case at all, as we'll see tonight. We also don't mean a perfectly mirrored all glass building surrounded in trees. There is a whole lot of room in between these two things, and you can actually build something that from the location of this photo would look exactly like the building on the left, but would be bird friendly. So that is good news. It's also important to kind of point out, and some of the slides at the end we'll go through quickly too, there are bird friendly buildings all over the place. Some of them were intentional, a lot of them were unintentional. So the architect designer went with their vision and ended up creating something that was not going to cause a lot of collisions. So we'll see photos throughout. In terms of why we're concerned about collisions, collisions with glass are the #2 source of human-caused bird mortality in the United States, excluding habitat loss. That is tough to put a number on, and pretty much if you could go back 500 years and compare it to now, that would be #1. But in terms of things that are a little more direct than that and measurable, cats are #1. Killing 2.4 billion birds a year, and it's 12 billion mammals. So if you've got a cat, please keep it inside. Collisions are #2 on that list, with an estimated 599 million birds a year in the US, and that works out to 1.64 million birds each day on average. That doesn't happen in average. There's some peaks, but there are collisions every single day of the year. And that's a big number, 599 million. So as a little bit of a frame for it, if you started counting right now and you didn't stop, no sleep, no work, no birding, no nothing, it would take you 19 years to count that high. So this really is a massive source of bird mortality, and fortunately, it's a preventable one. It's also a fundamentally different type of conservation conversation to have with people, because everybody's experienced it. Before my bird life, I studied monkeys in the Amazon, and talking to somebody about saving primates in the middle of a rainforest, they've probably never seen a monkey. They've probably never been to a rainforest. It is not something that they know. But everybody you talk to has seen a dead bird on the sidewalk, has heard the thud of a bird on the window that makes you sick to your stomach. So right away, you're starting at a point where you're talking about an intimate experience with wildlife that literally everybody has had, which also speaks to the scale of this issue, because most people aren't looking for collisions. They just have the collisions find them. This is an older commercial. Let's see if it will play. And even ESPN knows, so the sound probably won't work for you. But they're having a meeting, and the bird mascots keep running into their glass window in the back. And so I remember that commercial, being a sports fan, from well before I knew anything about window collisions. So this has kind of been in the popular culture and conscious for a long time, even though it's been only more recently that people have started putting these kind of eye-popping numbers and demonstrating the scale of the issue. And collisions happen everywhere that you find glass and have birds. A lot of people think it's downtown, but it's downtown, it's the suburbs, it's your yard. The photo on the upper left is one monitoring pass done by the Wisconsin Humane Society at the Milwaukee County Courthouse. And I think that is, there's the glass walkway from the courthouse across to the, I think it's parking structure. And those birds were all there. And the other photo is some of their collection from monitoring for a season. So this really is an everywhere problem. I'd like to step back quickly to talk a little bit more about that total number, because it can be a little confusing. You'll hear people say 599 or 600 million because it's easier, birds a year. Some people will say 1 billion. We say up to 1 billion. The study that estimated this in 2013 gave an estimate of 599 million, but it had a range on it, and that range went up to, I think it was 988 million. The study was intentionally conservative though, so they took the worst buildings and didn't include them because they didn't want to be accused of like pulling the estimate up. The data used in that study were also largely collected in the 1990s and the first decade of the 2000s, which, you know, at this point was a long time ago. If you consider how many new buildings have gone up, you consider the trends towards using, you know, 100% glass, more reflective glass, the number of new homes that go up, same problem, replacement windows on homes, same issue. So at ABC, we say up to 1 billion is the way we phrase it, but you might see these anywhere and they all are legitimate. There isn't anybody who's, you know, saying something incorrect. There's just a couple different ways to talk about it. And when you get into numbers like this, people will often ask, well, why don't I see more dead birds? That's a lot. Shouldn't I be like stepping on these every day when I go outside? There's a couple reasons for it. One is that there are all kinds of things that pick those birds up before you see them. Facilities people know where the bad collisions are in buildings that are big enough to have a facilities team. So we can just often ask them because they have to go clean them up before people show up for work, school, to go shopping. Because nobody who owns and runs a building wants people stepping over dead birds to get in and out of it. There's also, in addition to people, a whole lot of other things that pick those birds up. Skunks, raccoons, squirrels, cats, foxes, opossums, even chipmunks have been seen pulling these guys towards their holes. A lot of them fall on other rooftops. They fall into vegetation. They fall right at the base of the building, not necessarily on the sidewalk. They can fall all the way into the street, into water, and just never be something that you would see walking where you're normally walking. And finally, people don't generally walk around looking at their feet and looking at the bases of buildings. So this is happening whether you're missing them or not. Most of the collision problems are songbirds. So, you know, the birds that most people think of when they think of a bird, although probably not everybody in this group, you guys are more well-versed in birds than the general public. A lot of the collisions happen in spring and fall, and you have the songbirds migrating overnight, so they fly all night long, and then they collide generally during the daytime, but it can start in the, you know, the early morning hours. The collisions do happen all day long though during migration, so it's not something that's at 8 a.m. and then it's not a problem anymore. A lot of the songbirds we think are colliding just because of the type of habitat they use. There aren't a whole lot of mergansers that spend a lot of time right next to a building and a tree. So there is some kind of habitat pressure that, or habitat use characteristics that go into who's likely to collide and who's not. When talking to people, you know, I like to ask the question, well, which buildings do you think are the worst? You know, if I would say, well, pick, you know, a size of building, what would you pick to make sure we took care of? And kind of the initial, and, you know, its logical answer is to do all the skyscrapers downtown. And the skyscrapers downtown, those buildings that are 12 stories or higher, account for less than 1% of the total of the 599 million a year. So those buildings individually can be really bad and kill a lot of birds, hundreds or even into 1,000 each year, but there just aren't enough of them to add up. So you could fix every single skyscraper and not make a dent in this problem. About half of the collisions happen on 4 to 11 story low-rise buildings, which tend to have a lot of glass, tend to be surrounded by, a decent amount of vegetation. And there's quite a few of these buildings. And then, a little under half are at homes and businesses, which are 1 to 3 story buildings. And the range of birds at that, the average is 2.1 a year. But there's a lot that get quite a few more than 2.1 a year. Those can be up into 4 digits, maybe even 5, depending on the building. So this really goes to show that we need all hands on deck. We can't just do a couple buildings or one type of building. We have to really work on all of them. So there has been a lot of effort put into figuring out why this happens and what we can do to prevent it. And fortunately, we do have some things we can do to prevent it. What this research has showed is that the number one rule underlying collisions is that the more glass you've got, the more collisions you're going to have, which is fairly straightforward. You can see this picture is nice because it shows kind of the change in building trends over the years. So you've got an all glass Apple store, which has both a reflection and is perfectly transparent. Those are two things we're going to talk more about. To the left of that, you've got a black and white building, which is half glass, but the half that's there is really reflective. So that is better than the Apple store because there is, half as much glass per unit area. But then if you look in the back right, you see a skyscraper probably from the 50s or 60s, which is, maybe that might be a 25 or 30% glass. The windows are smaller and they're not reflective. So every decade we go and change the way we build, we are making buildings worse and worse as we go for birds. The second rule is that vegetation causes reflections and is also a magnet. So the reflections of vegetation to a bird is the same thing as there being another tree, which is obviously problematic. And it's also a magnet because it gives birds something to go to. They want to go to trees. They want to go to, shrubs and grasses, and, they need habitat. If it was just a straight parking lot, there are not going to be a whole lot of birds hanging out in the parking lot, although there will still be some. This is not to say that we don't want habitat around buildings. Habitat around buildings is crucial, both for people's mental health, for the energy efficiency and heating and cooling costs of the building and the carbon dioxide emissions, and for birds, right? You think this is bird habitat as long as you make sure that what's next to the bird habitat doesn't kill the bird. For things that kind of are the direct causes of collisions, people generally talk about them in 3 categories. The first is that the glass is reflective. And this is fairly straightforward. The glass is shiny. It reflects trees, vegetation, sky, water. It can even be reflecting just a street. So if you think of a T intersection and a building at the top of the intersection, all that building could be reflecting is a street with no trees. But for a bird flying down that street, it looks like it can keep flying ahead. So it does not have to be habitat reflected to be a problem necessarily, although habitat reflections are a bigger issue. The glass can also be clear. You can think about this like in skywalks. If you go to the Twin Cities, they have a lot. We've got some too in Milwaukee. And for a bird flying between those buildings, there's no barrier there. It's just wide open. So they are not perceiving that threat at all. You can think about a glassed in courtyard like this one here, or atria, that are especially bad if they're planted and really green, because to a bird and a downtown street, that looks like a pretty good place to go, except when they try, they can't make it because there's an invisible barrier there. Lighting is talked about a lot for bird collisions, especially with all of the lights out programs, and this year's World Migratory Bird Day theme is lighting. Lighting for birds works in two different ways. The first is called a beacon effect, and that's what you can see in the photos here. So when birds are flying overnight, they have the ability to see the Earth's magnetic field, and they use that to help orient themselves to fly north or south. And this ability actually from lab work looks like they don't have the same capacity to do it like in spring and or in summer and winter, excuse me. It looks like it's more of a seasonal property for some species. So for that compass to work though, the birds need it to be dark and they need for there not to be a lot of light pollution. And when you get that light pollution, it can throw that compass totally haywire and make it not work right. And so this is probably the best example of bright light on a dark background. These are the World Trade Center memorial lights. And this is during fall migration, I believe. And if you look at the lights, each of those white dots is a bird. And they're all stuck. So they've been drawn in and they fly into that and they can't really fly out. There are people who will say that they drop from exhaustion and they fly until they're dead, and that doesn't happen. Birds are really, really good at flying, and they have energy saved up to make these long flights. But this is a really, really inefficient use of the energy. And if you think about if those lights have been on all night, instead of making it clear of New York City and being, however many tens or hundreds of miles further north, these birds are all stuck in the city. And you can imagine what that would be like for them the next day and their chances of finding enough to eat and surviving cars, cats, and windows. However, there aren't a whole lot of situations where you can have a beacon effect anymore. This is a picture of Houston from a satellite. The light footprint here is the size of the state of New Jersey. If you went into downtown Houston and turned off the 10 brightest lights, it's not going to make a huge amount of difference in terms of how many birds are there. So the second way that lighting works is when you don't necessarily have like one intense beacon on a dark background, but you just have a lot of light pollution. And what the light pollution does, we think, and people are still working hard to figure this out exactly, is that especially as birds are starting to come down from their overnight flights, it draws them to areas that are more lit than areas that are darker. And if you're interested in not having them collide with buildings the next day, you don't want them where it's well lit. You want them in the dark spots. And so cities are probably overrepresented for migratory bird landings based on the amount of light they have. You can actually kind of see birds' flight paths moving this way a little bit on radar. And if you look, there's some kind of freeways that go out of downtown Houston. The radar ornithology, because migrating birds show up on weather radar, shows that there are concentrations of birds even along lit freeways. So you don't need Houston to have lights influence how birds move. Research in suburban parks shows that the birds fly and vocalize and act differently at night when flying over the park versus when they're flying over, the small houses next to the park and the streetlights. So this is really kind of a pervasive effect. And we at ABC, lighting is a tough thing to address. So we tend to focus more on the glass in the windows, while just always encouraging good lighting practices, which we'll cover more in a little bit. Some of the problem with window collisions is caused by birds and people seeing the world differently. So most birds have eyes on the side of their heads, like the robin. If you look at the robin photo in the middle, that bird's beak is pointed right at you, but its eyes aren't. And the result of this is that they don't have very good vision in front of them. So they can see, almost 360 degrees around because the eyes are on the side of their head. If that bird wants to look at you, it cocks its head sideways and looks at you with one eye, like the bird on the upper left. That is looking at you and wondering what the photographer is doing. You can kind of think about this as the fields of vision don't overlap in front of that bird. So if you look at the woman, the famous National Geographic woman on the right from Afghanistan, her eyes are in the middle of her head, middle of her face, and what each eye can see overlaps with what the other eye can see, and that's called binocular or stereoscopic vision. Primates have that. That's an owl monkey, which is right next to her. There are some birds that have it, raptors, so eagles, hawks, owls, kestrels. Um, those need to have really, really good vision and actually have better vision in many ways than people do. But they have that same overlap. Um, if you go back to what most songbirds have and think about that robin, if you stare straight ahead and you put your hands out to your sides, straight out to your sides, you can see that your hands are there. But if you don't cheat, if you keep looking forward, you can't tell yourself how many fingers, you can't see how many fingers you've got up. You can just see that your hands are there and maybe a little bit of movement. And that for the robin would be kind of like what it's like in front. And the result of that is kind of illustrated in the bottom left image. The robins and songbirds have poor contrast sensitivity. So their ability to see a pattern is way worse than our ability to see a pattern. So if you start looking on the left side of that image and move right, you can see a lot further. You can see distinct lines moving a lot further right than the robin could. The robin might only be able to go a couple lines over and then it wouldn't see anything, whereas you can perceive a whole bunch more. So that means everything a robin can see that's a pattern, we can see. We can see all of it. It doesn't work the other way. If it worked the other way, that would be great. If the robin could see a whole bunch of stuff that we couldn't, that would make my job a lot easier. There is an exception to that, though, is that some birds can see ultraviolet light. And that's the image on the upper right here. The human vision is represented by those peaks in the nanometers that our eyes perceive. And if you look on the bottom, I think that's a starling's vision. I don't remember exactly, but they have another peak around 370 nanometers. And once you get about to 390 or less, you're talking about ultraviolet light. So we just simply do not see that. There are some reasons why that's not a perfect solution for collisions, but it is a solution, and a lot of people are working on it. And we'll talk about that again when we look at some products in a minute. The image on the left is just basically, reinforcing that birds can see the Earth's magnetic field at certain times of the year. They also can see polarized light, which is complicated and is something that, is currently being studied. As far as we know at the moment, there's not a huge collisions application with that, although maybe for polarized light or for solar panels, there could be. We get this misconception is that people think that we can see glass, and we don't see glass. This woman here, you can spend a lot of time on YouTube looking for people running into stuff. So she's trying to leave the mall. She's not looking at her phone. She's not talking to her friend. She's not reading a book or messing with her bags. She's just trying to walk out the door. And I'm going to show it one more time. And she can't do it. She says, oh, let me go over here and whap. And then everybody's done this. You've all hit your head on something, walked into a door, and she had that moment of, oh God, I hope nobody saw that. Unfortunately for her, the camera saw it. So when people think they can see glass, what we're actually doing is responding to cues that we have learned mean glass is likely there. The image on the right, you can see an open window. So if I asked you which one of those three could you put your hand through, you're going to pick the open window. A bird never understands that and will never understand that. If I covered up that open window and then asked you again which one of these is open, you couldn't tell me because you lost your cue. There are a lot of offices that are switching to interiors that are all glass, getting rid of the walls. And you can see here's one on the upper left, and there's 2 rows of dots on those, which may kind of initially look like just a design feature. You can actually see it looks like there's a little bit of frosted glass on it too. Those are likely not a design feature. There's one at the eye height of a grown-up and one at the eye height of a kid to keep people from smashing into that. There's a cue. And the kid on the bottom picture there has clearly learned about the concept of glass, because if they didn't know that, you would think you would go shooting straight out the window if you didn't know there was glass for you to lean on. So birds don't speak architecture. They don't understand this. These are pictures of one building. If you look on the picture on the left, you can't tell me if that's a reflection or real. If you then look at the picture in the middle, you can go, oh, wait, I think I see some window frames. I don't really know if I could walk under those or not, but I bet that's a building. And then I show you the one on the right and you say 100% that's a building. To a bird, all three of those are the exact same thing. And reflection is reality. There's no difference to a bird sitting where the camera person is sitting right here. The birch tree reflected on the right and the actual birch tree are just as appealing as each other to a bird. And again, back to that planted courtyard, the glass barriers don't exist. For a bird, there is nothing between it and those plants. So when we talk about bird-friendly design, we're trying to change the conversation and have it not be an add-on. A lot of people call us and say, hey, I designed a building. I want to make it bird-friendly. And that makes it a lot harder. It's much easier if you start off by saying, I want to design a bird-friendly building. There's a lot more you can do, and it's a lot easier, and it ends up not just being swapping out glass for other glass. And you get beautiful, interesting buildings. When I was at Bird City and the observatory, I worked with the Milwaukee Bucks on Fiserv Forum, and there's a credit in the LEED system, which is the U.S. Green Building Council's kind of building certification program, and they were the first sports team to get it. So, it is possible for even non-traditional buildings to do this. So the strategies we talk about are, for the potentially dangerous materials, use as many that are bird friendly as possible. And we'll talk about what that means in a second. If you have to use dangerous materials, use them as seldom as possible. And then there are certain things we know that are design features and way buildings are built and shaped that make certain parts of buildings more likely to be problematic than others. So if you minimize those, and when you do use them, make sure that those have really strong bird-friendly design in them, you can get pretty far in making a big dent in the problem. So again, we want this to be incorporated from the beginning and to use multiple strategies. And the strategies would be reducing the use of glass. So if you're telling me I'm going to design a building that's either 100% glass or 60% glass, the 60% is going to be a heck of a lot better because you're not using nearly as much glass. Now, you will not end up with a bird-friendly building. A 60% glass building can still kill tons and tons of birds. But no matter what you do, it is going to be better than a building that is 100% glass. There's also a lot of energy reasons why reducing the amount of glass is a good idea. Then for the glass you do use, you want to reduce the exposure of it. So if you can cover it up pretty much in any way you can think of to cover glass, if you do it right, it's bird friendly and you don't have to change anything about it. So solar shading, which is done a bunch of different ways, an insect or a solar screen, which can go up as easily as with suction cups, louvers, all of these types of like secondary facades and things that designers put on buildings, like the front of the New York Times building we looked at a couple minutes ago. Those make the glass behind them safe. Then when you do use glass that is exposed, you use some of the bird-friendly patterns on it that we're talking about in the places where you need to. There are a whole bunch of things that doing this overlaps with, solar shading I mentioned. You can save money on heating and cooling and lighting, and also reduce the CO2 emissions of your building by reducing energy use. Glare control is a big one. So you get people thinking, oh, my building needs to be all glass. But then for some people inside it, it's too bright to work. are too bright to study or too bright to shop. So then you end up having to do things about that. A good example is the Minnesota Vikings stadium. They built that huge wall of glass, even though people tried to get them not to. And then when they hosted the NCAA tournament basketball games, they had to buy a $6 million curtain to cover up the glass because it was too bright on the court. So these are things that, you know, don't get full enough consideration or any before it's built because people know they want it to be big and shiny. This is just real quickly, you know, one of the kinds of features I mentioned. It's a setback. So birds are going to be kind of funneled into that middle part, whereas if that was flat and they were flying along the building, they would be a little bit less likely to fly into that gap, so, or the setback. So you can do things to avoid these, and then concentrate on making sure those parts are bird friendly if you use them. It's also critical to point out it's not just traditional windows like the buildings we've been looking at. The types of features here are often really, really deadly. Building connectors are some of the worst, and they're either reflective or transparent, and it can change based on the time of day. There are lots of them, and they're bad even if they're a couple stories tall. Bus shelters, and again, there's one row of dots on there to keep people from running into it. But nothing on there to keep birds from running into it. And so those can be bad. Clear noise barriers along highways are issues. Shelters, that looks like a little conference room at somebody's business. Even wind barriers at the top of parking garages. You know, you come out, you open the door on the roof of the parking garage, and if it's windy, the wind blows the door shut. So people are starting to put like wind barriers so that you can open and close the door, and they make them clear. And even on a parking garage with no trees around it, birds fly over the garage and hit those way more often than you would think. And, you know, why not put a bird friendly pattern on stuff like that? In the 80s, when people were first kind of starting to recognize how big an issue this was, they would say, put a hawk decal on your window and that will fix it, because the birds will be scared of the hawk. First, it's not a hawk, it's likely a kestrel. Always fun to share that with bird watchers. The second thing is that doesn't really solve the problem. Birds don't recognize it as a predator, they aren't scared of it, and the only thing it does is keep birds from flying into the decal. The rest of your window is just the same. So it works because it covered up a little bit of your glass. So you really need quite a few of them to really take a bad window and make it bird friendly. ABC has a tunnel where we study how effective products are at, you know, being visible to birds, basically. And this is based on a tunnel that started not too long before ours in Austria with a researcher named Martin Rüssler. And ABC now has 2 of these. We built a second one at Foreman's Branch Bird Observatory. The one you're looking at is at Powder Mill Bird Observatory in Maryland, or in Pennsylvania, excuse me. And during bird banding in spring and fall, they're catching migrants, and they band them, do their thing, take all their measurements, and then if the bird is in the right size classes, because we can't use birds that are too big or too small, and it's not stressed out, then we will take it and fly it down the tunnel once, and then we release the bird. If it's stressed, it goes back in the bag, it calms down, and then we let it go, and we don't run it through the tunnel. So the way the tunnel works is the bird goes in the end where those people are and flies to the other end. The mirrors are to put light on the glass, not for the actual bird. So the bird goes in on the left at number 1. There's a hole. Number 2 is when that bird is in your hand and you stick it through the hole, that's what the bird is looking at. There is a tunnel and one pathway out that looks like sky and light, and that is where they go. However, in image 3, at the end, we actually have 2 pieces of glass, and one of them is clear, which is the one on the right, and one of them has whatever pattern it is that we're testing, which in this case is on the left. And at the beginning of each season, we run a bunch of trials with clear panes of glass on both sides to make sure the birds are flying randomly and that there's nothing in the tunnel or the setup that is cueing them to fly one way or the other. And then we put the things we're testing in, and we'll fly 10 flights at it that way. Then we'll swap those 2 panes of glass, fly another 10, and then we take the one we're testing out and put a different one in so that no sample gets all of its test flights at once. And after a minimum of 80 successful flights, we can calculate an index to see which way the bird flew. And if for the piece of glass in here, they flew 50-50, they went 50% about to each side, plus or minus, 5 or 10, that's random, and it means they didn't see the pattern. The more they fly towards the clear piece of glass, the more they are detecting and avoiding the one with the pattern. And so the stronger that pattern, the higher we rate the ability of the glass, or whatever product it is, it's not all glass, to prevent collisions, because we know birds can see it. Then on the picture on the upper right, you can see there's a little net and there's a pair of pants, it looks like, hung on the door. And so we open the door, the bird flies out. Sometimes you have to run in there and get it and let it go. And it's on its way. It does this once. So the solutions that come out of this kind of work are tough to find, because birds are really agile. They know, according to some lab work, they know their wingtip to wingtip length with about 6% accuracy. So they know exactly how big of a space they can fit through. And if you think about having to navigate through trees, either to catch prey or to avoid being prey, it's important for them to not run into stuff, especially because their bones are hollow and break easily. On the upper left, you can think the same of going in and out of a nest cavity. The bird doesn't want to spend all day screwing around advertising to predators that its nest is there by hanging on the outside and taking 5 minutes to go in and out. They would like to get in and out quickly. If you look at the swallow on the right, you can also see they're agile. So that bird has its wings vertical as it goes between a very tiny gap. The lab work looking at birds flying through gaps like this shows that if that bird was approaching this at, say, 10 feet off the ground, before going through the gap, it would go to 12 feet off the ground, because it knows that when it's in there, it can't flap its wings and gravity is going to pull it down. It doesn't know about gravity. It just knows it's going to go down. And so it goes up a bit so that when it is falling during it, when it can't flap, it comes out and is flapping again at about that 10 feet it approached at. That's at least how it works in the lab. And it makes sense because they need to make sure they don't hit the ground. Just do this slide really quickly. So to make a piece of glass bird friendly, you have to put a pattern on it that a bird can see. There's a lot of ways to do this, and we'll talk about those coming up. You have to cover it up somehow, like we talked about, even with an insect screen. So if you're getting new windows, get the ones with full insect screens that always stay on the outside, and you're done. Spandrel glass is glass that you can't see through, and that's more of a kind of conversation for architects, and that gets complicated and confusing. So I'm going to skip it. If you've got a question and really want to know, feel free to reach out or ask after. So for the patterns that we're talking about, we have what we call the 2-inch by 2-inch rule. So it's illustrated here using lines just for simplicity. And whether those lines or whatever pattern it is are spaced horizontally or vertically, 2 inches apart is how close they should be to work. It used to be the 2x4 rule, but there are a lot of birds for whom, and with the 4-inch being if the lines were vertical. So the chickadee on the right, you can remove 50% of the lines from that basically. And for a chickadee, in all of the warblers whose wingspans are about 4 or 5 inches, hummingbirds are right down there too, 4 inches, 4.25. That's not a gap. That's not a barrier. That bird can fly through that almost without changing the angle of its wings. So it's better than nothing, but 2 inches is better as a blanket rule. If you're using lines, they should be at least 1/8 of an inch thick. And if you're using dots, they should be at least of 1/4 of an inch across. Those are just to make sure that the total amount of visual noise ahead of that bird is enough. If you make them smaller, like I said, they don't see well in front of themselves, so they basically disappear. So if you use dots that are 1/8 of an inch, or 1/10 of an inch, you may as well not have dots if your point is to avoid collisions, unless you cover the window almost entirely so that it becomes a solid. That's the basic rule. You can do a whole bunch of other stuff that doesn't necessarily follow the rule, and we'll talk about a little bit when we look at the options in a minute here. But if you know, a lot of places say, well, give me something that will work every time. And that is it, as long as it shows up. There are rules for how the glass has to be made if you're going to put it like on the inside of new glass, which again, that's for like glass companies and architects. So you couldn't just do anything you wanted. You have to follow a few other rules. Basically, if you make the window so reflective that it covers up a pattern that is not on the outside of the glass, there's basically no pattern there. So there's some ways to control for that. We also talk about irregular patterns, and there's not been a ton of research on that, but if you think about a bird trying to make a decision of, do I fly there or not? If you have a regular pattern, it's easier for them to judge, yeah, I think I can make it through there, because it's a perfect repeat, and there's more clarity and there's less confusion. If you take an irregular pattern, it's harder for the bird to figure out what is ahead of it, and they're therefore less likely to give it a try. Now, we don't have data that show that, so I always put a big asterisk with that statement, because it's just something that seems like a logical conclusion, and we know irregular patterns work, but we don't have the resolution to kind of scientifically say that. There are two ways to see that people build bird-friendly buildings and make existing buildings bird-friendly. New construction, or retrofitting is the term we use, which is basically fixing existing windows. New construction is through ordinances, which are, we prefer mandatory. You can do guidelines and policies too. You remember from the before, we can't just focus on one size of building, and we can't just focus on new or existing. There's kind of a temptation to just think, well, if we pass a bunch of laws, we're done. But remember, up to 1 billion birds a year are dying right now, this year, 2022. And so if all we do is every new building from here forward, we hit pause on killing up to 1 billion birds a year. And that's going to keep happening until we've replaced all of the existing glass, which is going to take a very long time. So we really need to try and work on both. There are a number of communities that have passed ordinances. ABC has been involved in drafting and writing and supporting these to varying degrees. There are a couple more that need to be added. New York City's is highlighted because so far they have the strongest one, which is great as a leading example, because if New York City can do it, it's hard for anybody else to say that they couldn't do it. There are other places that are not on this list that have voluntary guidelines, and we tend not to want to spend a whole lot of time on those because we don't think people tend to do them. I would rather have them exist than not, but the amount of effort that takes to create those and get them put somewhere official is not insignificant. And it tends to make people think that they're done and that they've addressed collisions, when really there is not the kind of uptake we want. So we prefer mandatory. I'm not going to go too far into depth on this, but the overall goals are to do anything you can to reduce the amount of glass overall, not by forcing people to do it, but by encouraging it, and then reduce how exposed it is. All of those ways we talked about covering up glass, and you can still see through it. Doesn't again make it so that it's not a window. Then maximize the bird-friendly glass. Focus on the lower floors. So most of the bird collisions happen in the lower floors of buildings, which is where the vegetation is. We have been working on a way to try and figure out, have better resolution on how high up collisions happen exactly. Certainly if you have a 50-floor building, it could happen on the 50th floor. But if you're going to say, well, Bryan, pick, you get to do the bottom 10 floors or the top 10 floors, 100% of the time I'm going to do the bottom 10 floors. And I would start at the ground floor and work my way up, because that's where most birds spend most of their time. You could think about it as the height of the mature vegetation plus 100%, so double it. So if your trees are 40 feet tall, you could think of trying to make sure the first 80 feet are bird friendly. because birds fly between trees, but they fly over them to go longer distances. They don't just fly from branch directly to another branch. We also want to see them include renovations that replace glass. Existing buildings do this a lot to save energy, especially as more places are adopting energy codes that kind of require buildings to reduce emissions. It's a big deal. In New York City, the buildings are the biggest source of CO2 emissions in the city. So replacing glass is kind of a significant way, and that is a way to get at all of these buildings that exist without needing to tear it down and start over. So New York City's law requires that in the first 75 feet above the ground, at the base of the building, we call it above grade, 90% of the glass you use has to be bird friendly. So you can use 100% glass, but 90% of it then has to be bird friendly. So you get a little bit that doesn't need to be to play with. Every building. So you build a new house in Manhattan, excuse me, not too many new houses in Manhattan. You build a new house in the Bronx or a new skyscraper in Manhattan, and this applies. We have a whole section on our website dedicated to this. We just finished redoing our model ordinance. I don't think the new one is posted, but there will be an August 2022 version posted soon. I hope next week. And there's all kinds of tools up there for the things to think about and how to do it and how to build support for it. And if you get to the point where you're considering this, please reach out. We're here to help. We've gone through this a lot of times and are happy to kind of provide advice and guidance. There are a number of starting points you can use. I think our model ordinance is the best. We basically say that it's 100, 100, 100. We want 100% of the glass on 100% of the buildings to 100 feet of grade. And nobody's ever done that before. So then the website shows you all of these ways that you can walk that back and make it simpler. But starting with our ordinance, it's got all of the definition in it. It's got all of those bad features that you should do no matter where they are in it. And then you can take the text and make it apply to fewer buildings or less glass as you see fit. New York City's is also a good model. We've got all of the text of all of the existing ones in there. The LEED system guidelines are up as well. There are a number of misconceptions about what causes collisions. A lot of people think if it's migration, the north and south sides of the buildings are going to be the worst. That is not true. The birds that are colliding are moving around during the day, during the landscape, and can come from any direction. So the amount of glass, the amount of reflectiveness, and the amount of vegetation are predictors of the direction. Overhangs don't fix this. So some of the early materials, if you got an overhang, the windows are fine. If you look at the picture on the upper left there, that is a massive overhang for the size of the area underneath it. And you can still see those windows, even the recessed ones on the left side, reflect a lot of vegetation. Angled glass doesn't make a difference, or not a big one. The building on the left, the thought was if you angle the glass, it'll show a reflection of the ground. But if it's tall enough or what's on the ground is vegetation, you're not doing yourself or birds any favors. Internal blinds, if you've got them, don't leave them all the way open or all the way closed. Leave them pitched like this. There's still a reflection of trees, but it at least creates some pattern, and it doesn't cost anything to do. It's a really easy behavioral change, but don't count on that working. Windows change over the course of the day. This is one window at different times. So I've mentioned some are reflective, some are clear, some are both, depending on your angle and when you're looking. Landscaping can kind of focus bird flight paths, either flying down the pathway. And if you have a glass door at the end of that, you're basically kind of channeling or funneling birds into it. Green rooftops are great, both for energy, water conservation, and for birds. Migrating birds use them more than you would think. But if you put a big glass observation deck in the middle, it's not so great. Planted courtyards and atria, birds flying over will drop down in there. Their first thought when they want to leave is not, I need to fly straight up. They see through the windows, they see the reflection of vegetation, and so they can get trapped until one of their collisions finally kills them. For lighting and what you can do, we encourage you to have your lights out during migration in spring and fall. And as long as they're off by probably midnight or 1 a.m. and you don't turn them back on until the following night, you're good. If you turn them back on at 5 a.m., you're not helping. I mean, you're helping, but you're still causing an issue. There are fixtures from the Dark Skies Association that they're certified, and they just point the light down. So basically, if you're looking at one of those from the street, it doesn't hit you in the face. You can look straight at the light. Whereas the lights you don't want are the ones when you're looking at it from the side, the light is going sideways or especially not up. For new glass, again, we talked about all of these things. I'm going to go through this kind of quickly just to give you a couple examples. So this is inside and out from some different types of patterns. This is a frit, which is basically like a layer of ceramic. This one is horizontal lines, and you can still see out the windows just fine. This is a product called Dot View, and these are dots that are so small that if you use them by themselves and space them out in 2x2, they wouldn't work because they're too small. But when you cover the window in them, it becomes something that turns it into a solid. But the backs of the tiny dots are black. So when you look through it, you don't really perceive that there's dots on the window. This is a new product that are shiny, kind of reflective metal dots. There's two versions of this. These are actually more effective than you would think for the size. And we think that's because of the way the reflection plays with light and increases the strength of the signal. And again, looking out that conference room, these have black backs too. You can't tell that there's dots there. This is an etch product, which is meant to be seen. So this is kind of more of a design element. This is another etch product, inside and out. And these are etched small squares. Another etch that is fancier. Some photovoltaic. I could talk about those for a long time, so we'll go fast. This is a picture of a UV window. So this has an ultraviolet pattern in it. Again, you don't really see anything. You can kind of tell there's a little bit of pattern going on, but you have to really know to look. This is one of the company's products on the bottom left here, hit with something to make it fluoresce so you can see it. Not all birds see UV light though. So if you've got mourning doves hitting your windows, this won't work. And it's also the most expensive way to go. It costs a lot more than anything else. But this is kind of what a lot of architects and glass companies like, because it's clear. So there are a lot of products on this, and we do rate these, and we'll call it effective, even though we will say it's not our favorite. We're working on this. Let me check the time. Okay. I started a little bit late, so I'll take another, hopefully 5 minutes here. This is new patterns we're working on. So with a researcher named Dr. Azadeh Sawyer at Carnegie Mellon, and she studies shading systems. So how you put a pattern on a building to reduce the amount of energy use. And so they've got all these fancy algorithms and computer models, and we've got these bird rules. And so they are taking their stuff and our stuff and making patterns like these. These are just 3 examples, and we're producing a booklet of them, and it's going to be free. And this is all you would need if you're a designer and architect to be able to take it and manipulate it, and then doing a rendering of the inside and outside. And this is kind of a heavy pattern because the top and the bottom get pretty thick. A lot of them don't show up nearly as much as this one. To try and encourage people to move away from just straight dots and lines like this. In terms of retrofits, which are the things that you would be looking at for your homes, I mentioned insect screens, which are great. A vinyl window film, so this is called feather friendly, and this just leaves the little white dots. So there's nothing else on the window beyond those little white dots. Is highly effective. It comes on a roll of tape, so you do 1 strip at a time. You don't have to put them on one at a time. There are all kinds of different window films you can put up that take differing levels of commitment and cost depending on the size of the building. This is a building at Northwestern we worked on, and they retrofit these windows. And again, from the street, you can't tell that there's anything up, but when you get closer, you can see the lines, and those lines dropped collisions on that building by like 90%. And that's a perfect mirror. You could shave or do your makeup in that one in the morning. There's another product called Kaleidoscape, which is like the bus wrap, what they print ads on buses. And that basically takes a window and makes it a non-window. So that's the top there. If you do go that route, don't get the black. The black does not work, but white and other colors can. Acopian bird savers are basically strings you put in front of your window. You can weight the bottoms, you can fix the top, excuse me, you can fix the top and the bottom so they stay there. This middle window has them. These have what we think a little extra effectiveness beyond making the pattern because it's three-dimensional. It's out away from the window. It's not two-dimensional and flat on the window. So these work and are definitely do-it-yourself. If you want to buy them, you can buy them on their website. They also on their website have directions you can download so you can make your own. They just want to save birds. They don't care as much about the money. Netting can work. You have to make sure it's thick, visible netting and that it's tight because birds can get stuck in that. Not really a hugely popular solution, but it is one. You can see on the window on the left, there's an insect screen on it. And if you compare it to the one next to it without the screen, look at what it did to the reflection. It's almost entirely gone. And those are highly reflective windows taken at a highly reflective angle. So it made a big difference. Another thing to think about when you're picking a solution is you should go look at your windows before you pick the solution. I mean, screens are one thing, do it, it's great, you're probably going to be done. But if you look on the bottom of that reflective window on the right, there's 3 black lines that are horizontal, and that's black tape. And it doesn't show up that well because it's a dark reflection with a lot of shadows. If that was white tape, you would see it immediately. So when you're picking your solution, it's important to kind of take a look at what is likely causing your problem and try and pick a solution that should work better. They all will work. Tempera paint is non-toxic, and it's a good project if you've got kids, a nature center, a school. Not really a solution for a workplace though. ABC has bird tape, which I hope is going to be back on the market soon. Looks kind of like clear tape, goes on your windows on the outside. If you ever saw and visited Forest Beach, the observatory's previous director and I and previous employee Mike Schlotfelt, Bill Miller, we put this up on the windows at the clubhouse because there was a collision issue and it pretty much stopped it. There are UV decals, which if you buy them should go on the outside. And remember, it's the same thing as that hawk decal, the Kestrel decal. If you put one in the middle of 30 square feet of glass, it's probably not going to make a big difference. It's better than 0. You need a lot of them to make a big reduction in collisions. And these can be kind of expensive and they wear out. The UV stuff only lasts for like a year. So the visual signal caused by the non-UV parts will stay, but it won't be as strong. We have all kinds of buildings, and I'm not going to talk about these. I'm just going to go really quickly through. It's just to show that we have a bird-friendly building slideshow that we're constantly adding to. And you see a range of different buildings here, but they're all bird-friendly. The Statue of Liberty Museum in New York City is a good one because that is kind of a traditional, clear window where they wanted the view, but that has a pattern on it. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. The bottom is Vassar. That one used Ornolux, which is one of the UV products. Again, these are some more traditional looking buildings that are bird friendly. You can do it with all different kinds of screening and shading systems. There's the New York Times building I mentioned on the left with the glass covered up. The two on the middle and the right are not my favorite here, kind of brutal, but no bird is going to fly into those. Different shading systems. Different glass colors can work and still let light through if you use the glass correctly. Window size and placement. So a couple quick final points that I will leave you with. Surface 1, which is the outside of the glass, is always the best. If you think about the reflection on the outside of the window, if you are going to take ABC's bird tape or a bunch of Post-it notes and you put them on the inside, they still have to beat the reflection to be seen from the outside. If you put them on the outside, there's no reflection where the pattern is because the material you're using to make the pattern is covering the reflection. So outside is always best. However, if you can't do outside for whatever reason, mobility issues or cost issues for the product you'll consider, or it's your second floor windows and you don't have a way to get up there or higher, put stuff on the inside and go outside and look. And if you can see it from the outside, it should help some of the time. So don't just abandon it if you can't get outside. Again, we want all buildings of all sizes, and both stuff that's already in existence and stuff that's not built yet. If you do make your windows bird friendly, make sure you tell people. It looks great. If you've got students or customers or supporters or donors or anybody who comes in your building, friends that come in your house, put something up in the doorway that says your windows are bird friendly, or make sure you point it out when they're there, because I guarantee you they probably won't notice. Which gets us to the next point. Trying to convince people to do this, often you hear, I don't want to interfere with the view. I don't want any crap on my windows. Most people don't notice they're there. I had someone watching my kids, and she was in my house, in my living room, where I have patterns on the windows for 3 days before she saw them. I've got example after example of people not knowing that the pattern went up in like their office. They've got 3 windows to look out all day, and they didn't notice. Someone had to tell them a week later. If you can do this as a new construction or fix an existing building, new construction is always better because it's cheaper, and you do it once and you're finished. The retrofit stuff can wear out over time. If you're picking between doing the glass or doing the lighting, always do the glass. The lighting is easier and more clearly saves you money, but by itself is not sufficient. And we've got on our website a products database. And if you go to ABC Collisions, which is a shortcut is birdsmartglass.org, you can see the product database, which has stuff for homeowners. That is the website there. I will ask, if you are not an ABC member, the reason we are able to do everything we do is because of our terrific members and donors. So I would invite you to also sign up and become a member. We have a collisions newsletter that you can get, an email newsletter that you can sign up for after you become a member too. Or not, you can just sign up for that even without being a member, although maybe I shouldn't tell you that. So the easy thing to remember, birdsmartglass.org has kind of a do-it-yourself kind of pile of materials for this. And we're going to be adding a more dedicated homeowner page in the near future. That's at the top of my to-do list. It's drafted. It's just got to get put up. So with that, I will stop sharing, I think. All right,
So we
I
have
think
a
I
few
stopped.
questions, but everyone should feel welcome to unmute yourselves and ask questions yourself. Or if you don't feel like being put on the spot, feel free to put them in the chat and I will read them for you. We've had a few questions come in. So let's see. There seems to be some confusion about the glass tunnel. So how you're asked, do birds actually hit the glass in the tunnel?
Yeah, because of the technical difficulties, I try to cut some stuff. I often make a joke right there that we take the picture of the tunnel from that angle because the pile of dead birds is on the other side, which is not true. There's actually the bird banding nets that they use to catch the birds in the field are really, really thin. And when you put them up to catch birds for banding, they're loose. And the birds fly in and get stuck. And it can be hard to get them unstuck for the bird banders here. We have those in front of the glass, but they're taut. They're really tight. So the birds hit them. The tunnel's not long enough for them to be going like 40 miles an hour. And they just kind of bounce. And then we open the door and they're sitting there. And they're all fine. So nobody is hurt during the filming of this commercial.
Awesome. So let's see. If you have a lacy pattern see-through curtain inside the window, will it deter birds from colliding?
I mean, it's better than nothing, right? You can try, especially, yeah, I mean, it depends on how reflective your windows are. If your windows are brand new, they're likely to be more reflective than if they're 30 years old because of the way they make windows now. So it will be less likely to work the newer your windows are. And the more of a pattern you can make that curtain make, the better. If you recall, when I used the example of the birch tree reflected and the birch tree next to the building being the same, those windows with the birch tree had closed white shades, and it still gave that reflection. So it really depends. I mean, the best way to do it is for you to try it and go outside a bunch of times over the course of the day and look. And if you can see it, there's a chance. But it's always best to do something on the outside, even if it's just drawing with a bar of soap, that will work. Scribble with soap.
Great. Could you share links with us, and then we'll send them with everybody for the different, like they're saying the adhesive things you can put on the outside of the window. I was thinking, would you mind sharing the link to the whole web page that has all of the products reviewed? I think would qualify.
Yeah. Yep. So right now the database is big at the moment. I think we've got 130 or 140, and there's a couple questions which help you filter it down to homeowners. The new pages I mentioned are going to be more explicit instructions for homeowners that only have the stuff without you having to look at the rest of it. So again, like going through that and getting it set this week so I can bug our web guys to get it up hopefully in the next 2 weeks. So I can send you the link, but I will just ask that you make sure you keep checking back, because there's going to be something more designed for that question pretty soon.
Do you have a short list for retrofits for homeowners?
Well, so that is what will be on that site.
Yes. Could you share it while it's still fresh in everyone's mind?
Well, right now you can take the products database and I can filter it down just for homeowners, which again has some stuff that you probably wouldn't actually consider. And I can send a direct link to that. So I'll do that. I'll send that to you right after.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Jackie's asking, are there any car stickers to promote prevention of collisions?
We don't have any. So someone may. I'm not aware of any of them though.
Okay.
These are kind of things that I hope to get to in the future. Kind of trying to find new ways, and I mentioned like put a decal in your door if you've done this to your building so people coming in and out see it. Like those don't exist either. But I have designs on getting window clings like that made. But don't expect those next week.
And maybe this sounds like something that Etsy might have, if you want to look at what the rest of the world has created.
Yeah, well, and you can certainly do it yourself.
Yes.
For all of these. Like if you can put it on the outside of the window and you make it visible, it should be effective.
I think what they were saying though is like bumper stickers or something to get out awareness about collisions.
Yeah, you could do your own of those too.
Yeah, for sure. There are lots of great websites out there if you want to get creative. If you do, let us know and we would share that with folks if you have great ideas on that. And so Sue wrote that she just typed in bird window film on Amazon and they have a lot of variety. What kind of recommendations would you have for going through that?
I would start on our website, because there's no law against calling whatever you have a bird window collision product. So there are some out there that, some of like we have a solar screen listed on our website, which just goes up with suction cups and you put it on the outside. And they don't know they're on our website. I just came across them one day and thought, oh, that's perfect. We're going to list them. But there are places on Amazon and other places, even some companies that specialize in bird collision products that sell things that we don't think work well enough to count. So I would say really start with our website. And if you've got questions, feel free to reach out and ask. The response time might be a little slow, but we will always reply.
And the other thing is, if you're in the Milwaukee metro area, we recently found someone who's up for being hired to install films and dots on your house. You have to pay for that service, but it is available if that's a problem for you. Um, Outside of the
And
area, you just have to talk to whoever.
well, and I'm a former house painter as well. I did that through undergrad and grad school, and it would be a new ask of a house painter, but they've got the ladders and they know how to clean windows. So those folks you could call any handyman. Again, it would be the first time they've been asked, but they can all figure this out. It's not very hard if you've got the tools.
And
Oh,
the other
and one
thing,
quick thing along those lines: if you're going to clean your windows first, which a lot of them say, don't use Windex, because Windex leaves a residue and then the stuff won't stick. And I actually did that on my own house when I put stuff up, and I was mad. I thought, boy, if the new collision guy can't even get this, how's anybody else ever gonna? And so
I did that too, and then I had to
you
rewash
use
them.
you use only water or water and alcohol, and then there won't be residue.
And also, if you're in the area, the observatory has done. If you want to see some houses that have it done, please let me know. We have a few board members and volunteers who have done it that are welcome you to come out and look at them. So that's also, if you want to see what this might look like in the real world, we're happy to do that. And the other thing, just for local folks, we talked to Solix and other film installers, and any of them will do films, any of the approved films. But you have to know what you want before going to them. I would just say that. Um, any other questions, folks?
Yes, I have a question. I put it in the chat, but I'll ask it. Did I hear him say that the ABC bird tape loses its effectiveness over time? I had purchased a roll and used it, but
Sorry to cut you off. What was the rest of it?
well, I said I've used it, but it's been up for a couple of years, and I'd sure hate to think that it's not going to last long.
No, the ABC bird tape continues to work until it starts to fall off, and you will see that happening when it eventually happens, if it happens. We've had places that have had that up for a very long time and had no issues, but if you put it on a full sun window in Phoenix, it's going to be a little different. So it's hard to make a blanket statement, but no, that is, if it's up and you can see it, it'll work just like it always did. The losing effectiveness quickly is with like the UV window cling decals that, like when you go to Wild Birds Unlimited, kind of sometimes there's like can be a basket of them on the counter. If you buy those, whatever you can see will always work for the bird because you don't see the UV. So if you see it, that level of it is always going to be effective until the thing falls off. But the extra like layer of UV that some birds can see doesn't last forever because the chemistry in the films is not right to make that part hold up. There is a new company that we've been testing and working with that thinks that they have solved that problem, so that their UV signal would continue to hold up. But I don't think you can buy those quite yet.
Well, I have one other question or problem. Because of disability issues, I spend a lot of my time in my living room looking out my big picture window and the feeders and the birds, and that's where I do have the tape on the windows, but I like to take photographs. And so one of the problems is having what I can have on the window that still lets me shoot pictures of the birds through the window. And when I put the strips up, I probably have them a little wider than I was supposed to or apart. But is there any product that you're aware of that would prevent collisions but let you take photographs through the window?
The screens are tougher, as you know, because it just puts, you lose so much light shooting through a screen, I would think. I used to take photos. I'm not at the level that you are, I'm sure. What I've learned during my jungle time is that if there's a leaf in front of me and the bird or monkey I'm taking a picture of is far enough away, as long as I get the camera to ignore the leaf, it disappears when I'm focusing on the bird. And so the products that are like the small dots, like the 1/4-inch white dots that are feather friendly, I think, I don't quote me on this, but I think the camera would probably just focus right through those and not even see them. And it probably wouldn't decrease your light levels a whole lot like a screen would. Other than that, trying to just shoot through the gaps on Acopian bird savers or, you know, bird tape or one of the others would be the way to do it. You know, if you've got a small, like, oh, well, my chair is here and I always take pictures in this one spot, you know, you could cover the window and not that one spot. Something might hit that one spot. You can't guarantee it, but you'll have fixed almost all of your problem and still get to take the pictures you want. We also don't have research on this. This is just another kind of, it seems logical. So we say if you want to test it, you could test it. If you've got your picture windows, and a lot of people put the feeder straight out from the window. And so if the birds are flushed off of that or they just leave, one of the flight paths has them going directly into your window. That's, you know, depending on the size, that's half of their, or, you know, a quarter of their escape pathway if you just go cardinal directions off the feeder. If you move the feeder over a little bit so that what is directly at 90 degrees across from it on your house is the wall or your shutters, you can still see it from the window. You can't see it from like one little slice of the window, but from most of the window, you can see the feeder. And then the bird has as a 90-degree flight path, something it's not going to fly into. It might still fly into your windows on an angle, but it kind of reduces the likelihood, and a collision at an angle has less energy in it than a direct collision. So that might be a help, although again, that wouldn't necessarily make your window bird friendly.
Thank you.
So one
we
quick
try and think of everything we can think of.
So I do have trouble taking photographs through my dots.
Okay.
The best thing I've had is just to like be really close to the window and like line up between them. So depending on the size of your camera, that might be an option. That has worked for me. The other thing I wonder is depending on how close you are to like how easily it is to move things. Maybe it would work to have like Acopian bird savers, which are physical ropes that you could like hook aside while you're photographing and then let them go back after.
Yeah, there are people who have come up with like a J channel type
Yeah.
to make it a curtain, and even easier than that might be to put up the Acopian bird savers and kind of similar to like leaving a spot, cut one in half. And so you'll have the bottom half of one section of it will be, you know, a little bit wider than the rest, and you could take your photos from there.
So let's see. What other couple of questions I think came in. We will follow up with websites. And would it be possible to show the picture again of the birch? So the question is, can you show the picture again that has a cling of what look like birch trees? So I think that might have been a reflection of birch trees.
Oh no, there was one that's a full window film. Let's see if we can make this work. All right, so you seeing it?
Yep.
Are you seeing the slideshow? Okay. Further. This one in the middle, the birch trees. Looks like birch trees. Is that the right one?
Sue,
I can no longer see you, so you have to say.
I think Sue might be clapping. So
okay. So yeah, that is basically, that person probably was not thinking about birds at all. They were just going for a design on their window. And that is likely on the outside and likely highly effective. And you know, the one on the left are birds as musical notes sitting on a score. So those are kind of in there to just illustrate, like, you can do non-traditional stuff. As long as you get a pattern out there and it doesn't have like huge gaps in it, you know, it'll be effective.
Let's see. Does anyone else have question? Let's see. Can you take photos through the screens that you can see through to the outside but blocks the sun so you're not blinded by the light?
The solar screens, I think, I'm not an expert in solar screens, but I think they're even thicker than the insect screens.
Mm-hmm.
So my guess is that they would be harder to take a photo through than an insect screen.
Do you know where to get the product that you were showing of the birch trees?
I would have to look to find it. That would be one where, like, if you went on Amazon and found one that looked like that you could put outside, you could just do it. You know, there's thousands of things that would work, that are out there that have no idea they would work. And I think that's probably one of them.
So just to keep in mind that 2x2 kind of idea, though, with whatever you're purchasing in the world.
And you know, that's the ideal, right? If the only thing you would do is say, well, 2x2 is great, it's 4x4 or nothing, or 6-inch spaces or nothing. Do the 6-inch spacing.
Yeah.
It will make a difference, just not quite as big as we would like. But
good point.
We always like push for the most.
Let's see. So we'll see if we can find that product, and if anyone can, we'll be happy to share it with everyone. If anyone,
yeah, I'll take a look.
And with that, unless anyone else has questions, or if I missed your question, please let me know. I think we'll wrap up, but I'm going to give you guys maybe 30 seconds to try any other questions. Otherwise, thank you, Bryan. And thanks everybody for coming.
Yeah, well, thanks everybody. And I will challenge everyone before fall migration to go do your worst window. Most of the things you could order would be here by then.
And it is not that hard. I did my house. It is not that bad, really.
I saw a question in the chat about white chalk lines. Yep, if they're up and you can see them and they follow the rules, yeah, they'll work. You know, we tell people, if you've got an emergency in a window that just like a ton of birds are hitting, like, just get a bar of soap and a washcloth and get the bar of soap wet and just go out and scribble all over it. And then when you're ready to do your solution, wash it off, because that will help too.
And then, do outdoor window clings stay on in the winter?
I think so. I don't have any. So I'm not endorsing any one, and I've tried a bunch at my house. I mentioned the white dots, those little feather-friendly dots, the stuff that is designed by like a window film companies or bird tape, like those all stay up. And I'm pretty sure the window cling ones, like the UV kind of decal products, also stay up because they're not just like static cling. There's like a little bit of adhesive to them. So those should stay too. Although again, like direct sun and wind and rain and cold, and eventually they're going to start probably giving way a little bit. But it might take a decade, right? At that point, you might be happy to replace them. And you know, a lot of the products will have a warranty. So you like look at a window film and they'll say, well, we guarantee 7 years. Well, that means people get 14 years and they've never had a problem. And they probably haven't been selling it longer than that. So you can usually take the warranty amounts and double them and know you're safe for at least that long, if not more.
Just really quick, on my box of the ABC bird tape, on the back it says easily applied, lasts up to 4 years. Yeah, that's a bit of a bummer because this was an expensive product and 4 years goes by really quick.
Yeah, that's our the cover the butt number.
Oh, okay. All right.
So like you could go look. I mean, we put them up I'm trying to remember when we did it at the observatory. I stopped at Forest Beach, excuse me. I joined ABC in 2018, so we probably put those up in 2016. And the last time I was there, they looked brand new. And we've got places that
now. They're like baked on now. They're really baked on now. So
yeah, well, that's actually what we get is people, I've had these up for 15 years and now I want to take them down and do something different. The removal can be a bit of work, depending on how what the conditions were and how long they've been up. So yeah, 4 years, like 100%, way more than 4 years.
And I first saw them at Forest Beach. So.
Oh, good. Yeah, those were tough to put up because we were on a lift and the windows are so big and there was not really a guide to keep them straight. So
I can attest to that.
Yeah. Yeah, when the window is, you're 6 feet tall and the window is 12 feet tall, it's a challenge.
Definitely. Okay. Yeah, so we'll share the information, we'll share this recording, and if you have any questions, we'd be happy to forward them on to Bryan. And if you want connections to folks in the Southeast area, please let us know.
All right. Well, Thank you for inviting me. And if I see you guys at an observatory event, come say hi.
Definitely.
I live in Cedarburg, by the way, so I'm still like right here.
Thanks, Bryan. And
all right.
good night,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.